The station hadn't seen a train in 2 days, maybe 3. No one kept track anymore. A single wooden bench sat beneath a crooked awning, half sheltered from the desert wind. And on that bench, curled up in a faded shawl, slept a woman. Not deeply, never deeply. Sleep came in bursts, interrupted by hunger, by footsteps, by the ache in her bones and the splinters in the wood. But she didn't move. Not during the rain. Not when local boys passed and threw pebbles near her feet. Not even when the sheriff walked by on the second morning and looked away, pretending he hadn't seen her. Her eyes stayed closed. Her hands clutched tight around a small leather bag. Inside it wasn't money or keepsakes, just a scrap of paper folded and refolded so many times the ink had become a whisper. An address. Once it meant hope. Now it was just something to hold. By the third evening, her breath had grown shallow. Her lips cracked and bruised. She hadn't eaten since the train left her here, and what little bread she brought she'd shared with a child who left 2 stops before. Still she waited. Shoes too tight on her swollen feet. Still she waited. The townsfolk didn't ask her name. They didn't need to. She was another one of those stories, the kind you saw from time to time. Some man wrote a letter, made a promise, and never showed. Left a girl in the dust with nowhere to go and no one to trust. It was dusk when the dust rose again, not from a train, but from hooves. A single rider approached, slow, steady, without show. He wore a brown coat stiff from years of sun and a hat pulled low. His horse moved like it knew not to disturb the stillness of the evening. He didn't speak at first, just sat in the saddle, staring at her like a man looking at a fire that refused to die. Then, in a voice like dry wood cracking in a hearth, he said 2 words. Come home. He turned his horse. Didn't wait to see if she'd follow. Didn't offer his hand. Didn't say her name. But she stood. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she stood. She picked up her bag, tucked the useless paper deep into it, and stepped off that platform with the last bit of strength she had left. And just like that, for the first time in 3 days, the bench was empty, and the road ahead didn't feel quite so cold. She didn't ask where they were headed. Her throat was too dry, and her words too brittle to use. Besides, she figured if he meant her harm, he'd have done it already. The man rode ahead, steady as the moon, never glancing back, but never letting the distance stretch too far either. The path they took wasn't much of a road, just 2 faint lines of hoof-worn earth, trailing out toward a ridge dusted in gold by the setting sun. She followed on foot, each step a question. Why'd he come? Why now? What did come home even mean? The wind tugged at her shawl like it wanted to finish what the world had started, breaking her down to nothing. But she kept walking, not out of trust, not yet, but because that bench felt colder than the unknown before her. An hour passed, maybe more, before the first sign of life appeared. A crooked fence, weather-worn, with a rusted bell hanging from a wooden post. Beyond it, a ranch house squatted low against the prairie, square and silent beneath the falling night. The man dismounted without a word, opened the gate with one hand, and let it swing closed behind her. No dog barked. No cattle stirred. Just wind and the creak of the old door as he pushed it open and stepped aside. She hesitated. Thresholds had never been kind to her. Storefronts, churches, homes, places where her name never fit. Her presence always narrowed the space. But this door stayed open. He didn't rush her, didn't turn his back, just waited. So she stepped inside. It was sparse. A wooden table with 2 chairs, a cold stove, a rocking chair in the corner beside a worn Bible, and an oil lamp that flickered like it remembered better days. No lace curtains, no scent of flowers, but it was clean. He didn't speak, just set a pot on the stove, ladled stew into a tin bowl, and placed it in front of her. She sat. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The first bite burned her tongue, but she didn't stop. She hadn't tasted food in days. He watched for a moment, then nodded, removed his coat, and stepped outside into the night. She ate alone. When she finished, she stood and looked around. One door led to a small room, a cot of rough wood and clean linen, a basin, a folded towel, a candle. No locks, no questions, only space. She sat on the bed, stared at the flame, and whispered for the first time in a long while, "I'm still here." Morning came slow and smoky, the kind of morning that didn't ask questions. It just arrived, heavy with silence. Pale light spilled through the lone window, cutting across the floor like a promise half-kept. She stirred from sleep wrapped in the clean scent of soap and linen. For a moment, her body forgot the cold bench, the ache in her joints, the hunger that had sat in her belly like stone. But memory came back easy. It always did. Voices didn't fill the house, just the sound of a pot shifting and the quiet scrape of a match. She stepped out of the room, half expecting the man to be gone. But there he was, sleeves rolled, pouring black coffee into a tin cup. "I found the beans by the stove," he said, voice low, gravel rough. "Hope you don't mind." She didn't. She nodded. He slid the cup toward her without another word. It was strong, bitter, exactly what she needed. They sat across from one another, two strangers stitched together by accident or fate, neither in a hurry to tear the thread. After breakfast, he stood and reached for his coat. "Storm broke last night," he said. "I got work to tend. Stay in if you like. Wood's by the hearth." Then he left, boots thudding quiet across the porch boards. She watched him go, watched the wind lift the corner of his coat, the way he moved like he'd worn the weight of the world too long to notice anymore. Alone again, she walked the space. There was nothing fancy in the house, no photographs, no portraits. But everything had a purpose. The broom stood just so beside the door. The dishes were stacked clean and even. There was care here, and that was rarer than gold. She took the broom and swept the corners, boiled water, washed her clothes in the basin with soap that smelled faintly of pine. She hung them to dry and mended the loose hem of her shawl. Work kept the memories at bay, but only for a time. By afternoon, she was sitting in the rocker, watching the fire. And when the door opened, and he stepped back in with a dusting of hay and the scent of wind on his coat, she felt something shift. He set a sack of potatoes on the counter, wiped his hands, and gave her a glance, not surprised to see her still there, not expecting her to be gone either. "You do that stitching yourself?" he asked, nodding toward the shawl. She nodded. "Good hands." He said it like a fact, not a compliment, but it warmed something in her that hadn't been touched in a long time. That night, they sat again at the table. No candles, no music, just stew and bread and the sound of a clock ticking slow in the corner. "Got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered, "Lena." He gave a small nod. "Ben." They didn't say more. Didn't need to. The fire between them didn't roar. But it waited, warm and patient. Some fires are like that. They don't need wind to catch. They just need time. The next few days passed like wind over tall grass, quiet, steady, easy to miss if you weren't looking close. Lena stayed. She didn't ask permission. Ben never gave it. But each morning when he rose with the sun, she was there, sweeping the hearth, boiling water, folding blankets with hands that trembled less each day. He never asked what brought her to that station. She never asked why he was alone out here with a clean floor and a silence thick enough to bury a man. Some things didn't need saying. Ben worked the land. Mornings, he turned soil too stubborn to yield without a fight. Afternoons, he mended fences or split logs. In the evenings, he came back dusted and quiet, and they shared whatever she managed to make out of beans, cornmeal, and root vegetables. Once she asked about meat. "Had a couple pigs," he said. "Coyotes took the last one. Haven't replaced him." That was all. She didn't press. One evening, a storm rolled in, more wind than rain, but loud enough to shake the shutters and rattle the dishes in the cupboard. Lena froze when it hit, hands clenched around her lap, like she was bracing for something worse than thunder. Ben noticed. "Storm won't come through the walls," he said. "Not gentle. Just true." She nodded, but she didn't move from the rocker till the wind died down. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the cot, bare feet resting on the wooden floor, listening to the house settle and sigh. Then she stood, careful as a whisper, and walked into the main room. Ben was sitting by the fire, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands resting on his knees. He didn't look up. "Can't sleep?" he asked. No. He reached beside him, lifted a small tin box from the floor, and opened it. Inside was a deck of cards, faded, corners softened by years of use. Play. She sat across from him, took the cards he dealt. She didn't smile. Neither did he. But they played 3 hands of gin in silence, and when she won the last one, he tipped his head like he meant it. Well played, he said. Her voice was quiet, barely there. You let me win. He didn't answer. The next morning, she didn't flinch when the shutters creaked, didn't brace when the wind caught the chimney and moaned like a ghost on the ridge. She poured water into the kettle and waited for it to boil, just like any other morning. The pain in her legs had faded some, though it never left fully. She walked slow, favoring her right side, but she no longer dragged her foot the way she had the first day. Later that week, Ben came in early, arms full of kindling. Got a doctor in Dry Creek, he said. Name's Pharaoh. Comes through every 2 weeks with a mail run. I can ask him to stop by. Take a look at your leg. Lena hesitated. I'll pay, he added. I can't pay you back. Didn't ask you to. She stared at the fire a long while. Then she said, soft and sure, all right. Outside, the wind blew cold across the prairie. But inside, something had taken root. Small, quiet, but real. Somewhere beneath the cracked earth of their silence, a bloom had started. It was near sundown when the wagon rolled up the lane, a swayback mule pulling a cart speckled with dents and dust. Dr. Pharaoh was a tall man with a thick white mustache, spectacles slipping down his nose, and a coat patched at the elbows. He tipped his hat when Ben waved him down and climbed off the buckboard with the stiffness of old age. Evening, Turner, he said. You're a sight for sore eyes. Ben nodded toward the house. Got someone needs looking at. Dr. Pharaoh arched a brow but didn't ask. He was a man who'd seen too much to waste time on what folks weren't ready to say. Inside, Lena sat stiff in the rocker, her hands folded tight in her lap. She didn't speak when the doctor entered, didn't smile. But she didn't flinch either. Ben offered a quiet word. This is Lena. Hurt her leg. Dr. Pharaoh nodded, setting down his bag. May I take a look, miss? She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. He knelt carefully, gently easing up the hem of her dress past her ankle. The limb was thin, paler than the rest, the muscle wasted and tight, like rope drawn too tight over months of stillness. Dr. Pharaoh worked in silence, testing, prodding, muttering now and then under his breath. After a time, he stood, wiped his hands, and turned to Ben. No break. Old injury, most likely from a fall. Could be nerve damage, could just be neglect. She's been walking on it wrong a long while. Ben nodded. She needs stretching, Pharaoh continued. Massage. Maybe splints. And rest, but not too much. You wait too long. It'll stiffen again permanent. Lena didn't look up. Will it ever be right? The old doctor paused, then answered honest. It won't ever be new. But better? Yes, if you work at it. She nodded, silent, her eyes far away. After Pharaoh left, Ben sat across from her again, setting the fire with slow, practiced hands. You didn't ask how long you could stay, he said after a moment. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, I figured I'd know when I wore out my welcome. Ben looked into the flames, jaw tight. You haven't yet. That night, she slept with a rolled-up blanket beneath her bad leg, just as the doctor said. In the morning, she gritted her teeth through every stretch, every ache. She didn't cry, didn't complain, just breathed through it like a woman who knew pain didn't ask permission. It just stayed till you earned its leaving. Days turned to weeks. Lena began to walk steadier, slower but sure. She helped gather eggs, washed Ben's work shirts by hand, read aloud from the old Bible in the evening, her voice halting at first, then clearer with each verse. Ben listened. He didn't ask about the man who'd written that letter. Didn't ask why she'd waited at the station 3 days for someone who never came. And Lena didn't tell him. But one morning, as they sat drinking coffee by the window, she said softly, his name was Eli. Said he had land. Said I was the kind of woman a man could build a life with. Ben didn't answer right away. Just stared out at the fence line, where the snow was beginning to melt. Finally, he said. He was wrong. She looked up, startled. Ben met her eyes. You ain't the kind of woman a man builds a life with. You're the kind a man rebuilds his soul with. She blinked once, twice. Then she smiled, a slow, honest thing that didn't ask for anything in return. Outside, the wind turned gentler, and the prairie sighed like it had been holding its breath. Spring crept in like a half-forgotten hymn, soft and shy, brushing snow from the corners of the prairie with fingers made of light. The land, once locked beneath frost and silence, began to breathe again. And with it, so did Lena. Each morning, she limped out to the porch, wrapped in her shawl, and watched the thaw spread across the fields. Her legs still ached, stubborn as a mule, but she walked now, really walked, leaning less with each passing day. Ben built a small bench for her outside the house, beside the corral where the hens scratched in lazy circles. He didn't say it was for her, just hammered it together and set it there one morning like it had always belonged. She thanked him anyway. Some days he'd sit beside her at dusk, their boots scuffing the dirt in silence. No need for talk. The quiet between them had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, just wide enough to breathe. One afternoon, Lena asked, "This place, was it always yours?" Ben paused before answering. "No. My brother bought it first. Died in a fire. I took it over. Never meant to stay. Just never found a reason to leave." Lena nodded. "You got family?" "Had. They scattered like tumbleweeds after the war. A few graves out back, that's all now." Lena turned to the field. "I got no one either. Just me and the leg I drag." Ben looked over, voice steady. "Not dragging now." That night, he fixed up the old barn with extra straw and cleared the loft. He didn't say why, but Lena understood. He was preparing, for what? Neither of them knew just yet. The next Sunday, Ben handed her something wrapped in oilcloth. She opened it to find a pair of boots. Soft leather, worn but polished. "They were my mother's," he said. "She had strong feet. Figured they'd do better on yours now." Lena held them like they were made of glass. She didn't cry, not out loud, but her hands shook as she pressed them to her chest. When she wore them the next morning, she stood straighter than she had in years. They walked the fence line together that week, side by side. He pointed out where the posts needed shoring, where the soil was good for planting. She listened, asked questions, her voice stronger with each step. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars wake, Ben said, "Was thinking of fixing the roof on the shed. Maybe planting corn in the west field." Lena sipped her coffee. "That'd be good." "And maybe," he added, not looking at her, "adding another chair out here. For good." She smiled. "You sure?" He nodded. "Only thing I've been sure of in a long while." She didn't answer, just reached over and laid her hand atop his, worn, calloused, steady. And the prairie wind, still cool but sweet with promise, whispered through the budding grass. By summer's rise, the land had shed its winter skin, blooming wild with new life. Rows of corn pushed from the soil. Chickens laid heavy and often. And Lena, now strong enough to carry water without favoring her right leg, moved like a woman who'd never been broken. The townsfolk began to whisper again, but not about her limp or how she'd arrived. Now it was about the Turner place. How it didn't look quite so lonesome anymore. How Ben had been seen buying a blue ribbon at the dry goods store. How Lena laughed sometimes, out loud. They hadn't spoken of marriage, not in plain terms. But one day, while she patched the hem of Ben's work shirt, he stood in the doorway watching her. After a long silence, he asked, "You believe a man's past has to own him?" She looked up, needle paused. "No," she said. "Only if he lets it." He nodded, slow. "Then I reckon we might have ourselves a future." That was all he said. But the next Sunday he rode to town, came back with a silver ring tucked in his coat pocket and 2 letters in hand, one for the preacher, the other for the county clerk. They married beneath the cottonwood near the field's edge. No guests but the wind, a few birds, and the dog that had wandered onto the porch the week before and never left. Ben wore his best shirt, clean and stiff. Lena wore a dress she'd sewn from an old curtain, cream-colored with small blue flowers. Her limp was still there, but she didn't hide it. She walked proud, hand tucked in his, steady as any bride. The preacher said his words. Ben said his. And when it came time for hers, Lena looked into the eyes of the man who had once said only, "Come home," and answered, "I already am." They didn't kiss in front of the preacher, just smiled that small, crooked smile they'd both come to know so well. The summer rolled on, full of early sunrises and dust-clouded chores. Their life wasn't easy, never would be, but it was theirs. Some nights they'd sit by the porch, watching the moon rise slow over the prairie, and Ben would take her hand, calloused and ink-stained now from her letters to the town paper, recipes, stories, thoughts folks had started printing under the name Prairie Wife. "You ever think on how far you've come?" he'd ask. She'd nod, and I remember how it felt when I couldn't move at all. Then they'd fall quiet again, just listening to the wind, letting it carry away all the ghosts they'd learned to live without. Autumn found them thriving. The harvest was lean, but enough. The hens still laid. The well hadn't run dry. And Lena's leg, though stiff in the morning, held its strength till sundown. But peace on the prairie never stayed long. Not when there were men out there still chasing debts, grudges, and whatever fortune they thought they were owed. Ben knew trouble when he heard it. Late one afternoon, just as the sun began to drag its heels across the hills, 3 riders came down the main road, kicking up dust that didn't settle. They weren't dressed like drifters, but they carried themselves like men who expected things to go their way. One had a scar from jaw to collarbone. Another's hat was cocked too sharp to be casual. The third, older, rode in the middle, like he was used to giving orders. Lena watched from the porch, hands still from the sewing in her lap. Ben stepped off the stoop and met them halfway, his coat unbuttoned but his eyes like stone. "Afternoon," said the man in the middle. "Name's Thatch. Heard a fella by the name of Turner runs this land." Ben nodded. "That's me." "Well," Thatch said, smiling like a rattler, "I reckon there's some business needs clearing. You see, that parcel you're farming, it used to belong to a man named Wilkes. Owed me money before he vanished." Ben's jaw tightened. "Wilkes died. This land was cleared legal. I got papers in the house." Thatch shrugged. "Paper don't mean much out here, does it?" From the porch, Lena stood slowly. Ben noticed her hand resting near the shotgun, just inside the doorframe. "I ain't looking for a fight," Ben said, voice level. "But you ride up again like you own the place. We might have one." Thatch studied him, that snake smile fading. "You married that woman sitting behind you?" Ben didn't look back. "That's right." "Shame," Thatch said. "A pretty thing, even with a limp." The silence that followed was thick as smoke. Ben didn't raise his voice, didn't step closer, just said, "You best leave now." The 3 riders didn't argue. Not that day. They turned slow, kicked up dust, and rode off without another word. But Lena knew the look in Ben's eyes. "They'll be back," she said. Ben nodded once. "Then we'll be ready." That night, he oiled his father's old rifle, laid out extra firewood, and nailed the latch tighter on the back door. Lena boiled stew and sliced the bread thinner, stretching the flour. When she sat beside Ben at the table, she didn't tremble. "I thought I was done running," she whispered. "You are," he said. "You're home now. And we protect what's home." Outside, the wind howled across the fields, and the stars blinked down like watchful eyes. The prairie was no place for the weak, but Lena and Ben were no longer just survivors. They were a shelter. They were a stand. 3 days passed with no sign of Thatch or his men. But Ben knew better than to hope. Men like that didn't ride away, they circled. They waited for a time when shadows ran longer and folks felt safe again. But Ben wasn't a man to forget. He spent those days checking the fence line, sharpening tools that could serve more than one purpose. Lena, for her part, kept the house tight, moved her sewing table near the window, and practiced walking with a cane carved from hickory. Not because she needed it, but because it kept both hands free. The storm came on a Friday evening. The sun was red, swollen behind a gauze of dust, when the sound of hooves returned. Lena saw them first, just 2 this time, not 3. Thatch and the scar-faced one. Ben stepped out slow, rifle loose in his grip. Thatch raised a hand, but not in greeting. "Look," he called. "We've been thinking. Ain't right to press a man who's dug roots. Maybe we got off wrong." Ben said nothing. Thatch dismounted. "How about a deal? You let us ride through. Take shelter in the barn tonight. We leave come morning. No trouble." Lena stepped beside Ben now, cane in hand, eyes hard. "We don't need company," she said. Thatch smiled wide. "Didn't ask if you needed it, sweetheart." The scarred man laughed, then reached for something beneath his coat. The rifle cracked once. He dropped like a sack of feed, a hole blooming in his shoulder. Ben lowered the barrel, smoke trailing like a warning. "Next one," he said. "Won't be your arm." Thatch's smile withered. His hand hovered near his belt, but he didn't finish the reach. He backed away, gritting his teeth. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Ben didn't answer. Thatch hoisted the wounded man onto his horse with a grunt and climbed up after him. "You think you've won," he barked. "You think love makes you strong? She ain't worth the trouble, Turner." Ben raised the rifle again, but Lena beat him to it. She stepped forward, eyes blazing. "I'm not the one who's weak, Mr. Thatch. I'm the one who was left to die and learned how to stand. I'm the one who stitched my life back together while men like you spent theirs breaking things. So ride on, or come back, and find out what happens when you try to take something from people who've already lost everything." Thatch stared at her like she'd slapped him. Then he turned and rode. The dust settled slow, as if reluctant to let them go. Ben exhaled and lowered his rifle. "You always that sharp with words." Lena's lips twitched. "Only when I mean em." That night, they didn't say much. Just held hands by the fire, the silence full of something steady and unshakable. Not fear, not hope, just a quiet kind of knowing. They'd stood their ground. Together. Winter returned like an old friend with a cold handshake, quiet, gray, and heavy. But this year, the house didn't feel like it would buckle beneath it. Lena sat by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a mug of chicory brew. The cane leaned forgotten against the table leg, unused for days now. Her limp hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled her. It had become just a part of her, like her laugh or the way she always counted her stitches out loud when she sewed. Ben came in with snow clinging to his boots and his breath curling in the air. "Roof's holdin'," he said. "Pigs are fed. Well, ain't frozen." He hung his coat, pulled off his gloves, and sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The fire popped. The house creaked gently in the wind. Then Ben looked over. "You think we'll ever see them again?" "Thatch and his kind." Lena shook her head. "Maybe. But we'll be ready if they do." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "Never thought I'd have this," he said. "A home. A woman like you. Peace." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "It ain't peace, 'cause the world leaves us alone. It's peace, 'cause we choose it every day, even when it's hard." Outside, the prairie was hushed, blanketed in snow that glowed beneath the moonlight. The fence post stood proud. The barn door stayed shut against the cold. And the house, the little house with creaky floors and old windows, stood tall. Months passed. Lena took to writing more. The Prairie Wife column became a favorite in the county paper. Folks wrote in from miles around, asking advice on everything from recipes to keeping your heart from breaking. Ben built her a writing desk from old fence wood, polished it smooth, and carved her initials in the side. Sometimes, Lena still thought about the station, about the bench, and the cold, and the silence that once lived inside her. But now when she did, it wasn't with pain. It was with awe. She'd survived. She'd been left behind, and still, she'd risen. Because one man, quiet, plain, good, had offered not pity, not rescue, but a place. And she'd taken it, not as a burden, but as a partner. One evening, as spring stirred on the horizon again, Ben looked out at the land they'd worked side by side and asked, "You think we've done all right?" Lena looked out too, at the fence lines, the rows of new planting, the rooster standing proud on the coop roof. She smiled. "We've done more than all right," she said. "We've built something no storm can blow down." And with the wind at their backs and the sun settling low, the lonely farmer and the woman who couldn't walk sat in the house that love had raised, unshaken, unyielding, and finally home.